All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Studying in the USA webinar put on by our Education USA Center here at the US UK Fulbright Commission. Just to let everybody know, this webinar will be recorded. And in the webinar, we are planning to cover a number of topics relating to how to get started thinking about studying in the US. So we'll be covering how to choose a university, how to fund your studies in the US, all the details of applying. And we'll be taking questions at the end, and you can use the chat, the question and answer box. So my name is Abby. I'm an Education USA advisor, and I'm here joined by my colleague.
Hi everyone, my name's Rowena. I'm also an Education USA advisor here at the Fulbright Commission in London. Studying in the US changed my life, and we're super excited to be able to share how you could go about this today as well.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about Education USA at Fulbright. So Education USA is an advisory service that's part of a global network that comes under the umbrella of the US Department of Education. And it has over 400 advising centers across the world that help guide international students on how to apply to US universities and how it's possible to study at a US university and all the processes that are involved with that. In the UK, we're based at the US-UK Fulbright Commission in London, and the Commission and Education USA are paired up to help people explore education in the US and at graduate level. And the Commission grants a number of awards and scholarships to talented students. Our aim at Education USA as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we're very happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the undergraduate experience at US universities. All right, so the first point we want to cover and the first question that we want to answer is why study in the USA at all? And why study in the US instead of the UK? So there's a few primary reasons that one might choose to study in the US instead of in the UK. So first of all, the reputation and variety of US universities. There are over 4,500 US universities offering undergraduate degrees in the US, and that's compared to about 120 in the UK. So you can see there's far more universities in the US, and within that 4,500, there is a huge range of personalities and styles available, different types of US universities, which we'll go into in more detail in this webinar. So US universities are known for their reputation and the full range of programs on offer, and also producing some groundbreaking world-renowned research. So we'd advise focusing on fit when you're considering how to go about choosing from this massive number of universities. And this will allow you to find many high-quality unis, and many of them you've probably never heard of. So the opportunity to experience campus life and activities. This is another draw to a US university. US unis are known for having vibrant campus life, and they encourage students to be involved outside of the classroom. So there's a lot of extracurriculars on offer on all US university campuses. And an example of extracurricular involvement might be music, like a cappella groups or orchestras, dance, and many, many types of sports that you can play at different levels. One fun example is at the University of Wisconsin. They offer log rolling. So you can also try something you've probably never tried before. Then we have liberal arts and the focus on teaching. A top attraction for UK students who want to study at US universities is something called the educational idea of a liberal arts curriculum. And what this basically means is it's a well-rounded education. This means you have the flexibility to explore interests before selecting a major or before selecting your primary area of study. So at US universities and at these specifically liberal arts universities, there's an emphasis on teaching and engaging within the classroom environment. You can take a combination of different study topics. For example, you can do engineering and art, or history and chemistry. For example, a student who switched from biomedical engineering to global gender studies after taking a class on feminism. This might not be a student profile you could really find in the UK, but it's definitely possible in the US higher education system. The system is also different to the UK, where you're more restricted in your pathways, and you have to choose your subject focus before you even start. This is not a requirement within the US higher education system. There's also some funding opportunities that are available within the US, which might sound surprising, but it is actually another top reason why you might want to consider studying in the US over the UK. We'll discuss this later on in more detail, but there are many opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US compared to the loan-based program in the UK. Also, studying in the US as a UK student will internationalize your CV. Studying abroad is very appealing to employers, as it highlights boldness to do something different, helps develop interpersonal skills, and lets you gain experience in cross-cultural communication as well. Also, this gives you studying at university in a different country also gives you the opportunity to build networks of friends and professional contacts around the world, and opens up job opportunities. Whilst you're out there, you can work 20 hours a week during term time and 40 hours a week during holidays, and then up to a year after graduation in the US. And finally, a point we want to highlight is that you can learn about a new culture. This tends to be a big pull for international students who want to experience the US and everything that it has to offer. The US spans across 6 time zones, and it has a massive diversity in geography and cultures. So there's definitely a lot to experience, and going to an undergrad university for 4 years is not enough time to experience everything, but it's definitely a really good start. Another something that can be quite a pull to study in the US is the long summer holidays to explore. Some of the friendships you make may also take you across the country. Maybe, some friends might invite you to come see their home. So it's a really great way to explore the country. And then just living on campus will also help you get to know more about this through your roommates and classmates and activities and national holidays in the US. So some of the key differences we're going to talk about between the US studying at uni level in the US versus the UK. One primary difference is the duration. So typically US undergraduate degrees are longer programs than in the UK. So this is primarily seen in the 4-year bachelor's degree versus the typical 3 in the US. And then the application system is quite different than in the UK. So admission is to the university as a whole in the US, not a particular academic department. And this just reflects the liberal arts, and that you may not choose, you don't have to choose a major until later in the process, often even after you've started studying at that university. And this is compared to the very course-specific degrees in the UK and the course-specific application process in the UK. Also, there's less government control and standardization in the US, and the positive from that is that there is more institutional diversity and freedom. But on the other hand, that does mean that there are no set fees or centralized admissions process. So the application process is slightly longer and more in-depth than in the UK because the admissions process is more holistic and about much more than just grades. There's no equivalent to UCAS for US universities, but the guides available on our website are there to help you navigate this. So another thing to consider that's quite different from the UK is the funding system. So you apply for funding alongside the application for admission and not after you are admitted. So something we really emphasize is that you need to consider how you're going to fund your education in the US while you're deciding which universities to apply to. Also, we want to note that there are some big exceptions that you need to keep in mind to studying at an undergraduate institution in the US. For example, law and medicine can only be studied at the postgraduate level. So if you really have your heart set on studying law or medicine in your undergraduate degree, a UK university might be the best option for you. So we also want to highlight some key terminology differences between the US and the UK systems. So in the US, students attend high school, and high school is from grades 9 to 12, which correspond to the UK secondary school, which is years 10 to 13 in England and Wales, and years 11 to 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 to S6 in Scotland. Another important thing to understand about the terminology for US universities is that college, university, school, institution, all of these words is what we refer to as university in the UK. So the term college does not mean the degree is worth less, and in fact, it is the most common term used for uni in the States. So in the US, you'll have various classes or courses, which in the UK are called modules, and your degree program or major is the same as a UK course. So this is helpful terminology for you to keep in mind as you start doing your research and research program in schools, colleges, unis that you might want to consider applying to in the US. So what does the application timeline look like to apply to an American university? So we recommend beginning the researching unis 12 to 18 months before enrollment, which is typically at the end of year 12. So you can register for any required admissions exams and aim to take this in summer after year 12. If needed, we'll cover this a little bit later, but some universities aren't requiring these admissions exams, but as I mentioned, we'll cover that in a little bit. You will then finalize selection of where you will be applying in early autumn of year 13, or 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And we'll go over strategies of how to do this a little bit later on. And then about 8 to 10 months, or the autumn of year 13, you want to start putting together your application and submit your application according to the deadlines. Something to keep in mind is that different unis will have different deadlines. And then in the spring of year 13, or about 4 to 7 months before you enroll, you can expect to hear back from the universities you applied to with their admissions decisions. And based off of where you were accepted, then you'll notify universities of your decision and apply for a visa, which would all take place about 1 to 3 months before enrollment. There are loads of resources on our website to help with your pre-departure, including travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, etc. So please do check that out. And you will typically start around mid-August to early September, which is when the semester usually, or terms usually begin at US universities. And this is slightly earlier than what is typical in the UK. So now we're going to go on to how to choose a university. And for that, I'm going to pass it along to my colleague, Rowena.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Abby. So how do you go about choosing a university, especially in the United States, where you have so many different options on the table? So choosing a university and getting that part of the strategy of applying to US universities is really important. And it's also really important you take your time in doing this. As Abby mentioned when we were talking about the timeline, if you're in year 12 or earlier in England and Wales, then this is a really good spot to be thinking about university research and finding out more about the different universities and the different options available to you. The more time that you can spend on research, the more time you're going to find a university that could be a great fit for you. So when I'm working with students, what I often say to them is my top tip would be that you think about this process and the time that you devote to it as a line. And what you want to be doing is spending perhaps 80–90% of the time that you have for this process on actually just researching universities, getting a clear picture of what's out there and available, and actually only 10% of time on applying. Sometimes I see UK students trying to jump straight to applying to a particular university, and because they haven't done the research and haven't spent that time in finding a good fit university, their application doesn't get very far. So you want to think about this step, and you want to think about being flexible and open-minded in this. There is more than 1 or 2 universities in the United States, and so you want to be making sure that you've actually spent the time digging into what might be a good fit for you. 4,500 universities, nobody can possibly know everything about all universities before they start applying. So it is about spending some time on researching. I know it can seem quite a daunting process when you think, gosh, I don't know, maybe I live in the UK. I know perhaps a few US universities, but I don't know much about them all. So it can be quite daunting to think about how do you go about researching them and then narrowing down. But we're going to discuss some strategies in this next section to understand how to move through that process. Next. Okay, so a few important things to note before we even get started. So what you want to consider in this process. You want to remember that in the context of applying for US study and choosing which universities you want to apply to, you want to remember that there's a few great big pieces to remember. So each university can be really different to other universities. Unlike the UK, where the UK government controls how universities are set up and how they are organized, in the US, universities have a lot of freedom and flexibility to organize the way they teach, the classes that they teach, the way that a degree is organized is very much up to them. So what you'll see is that each university will do things differently to other universities. And so that can really affect the academic experience and the experience of being a student at that university. What you'll also see is that each university can choose to set its own fees and its own structures. It can even choose its own admissions process. There's no one way of doing things like there is in the UK. And that means that there's a huge amount of variety and diversity amongst each institution. And so that's one of the things that can be really attractive. You will be able to find a university that is a good fit for your personality and how you want to be studying for your degree. But it is going to mean that you're going to need to do some research to understand those different personalities along the way. So when you're thinking about this choosing process, you want to be open-minded, and you want to spend some time thinking about what is important to you. There's a couple of other things to just say here. We're going to talk about some funding later, but I do want to just plug it here, because if finding funding to help afford your studies is important to you, then you want to make sure that this is considered right from the get-go, right from the beginning of the process. Unlike in the UK process, where you would apply to UCAS first and then apply to student finance for a student loan and other funding later down the line. In the US process, this needs to be up front and center and a key consideration at the beginning of the process rather than leaving it to the end. Every year, every spring, we get students getting in touch with us asking, how do I find funding? I've got admitted to my favorite US university, but I haven't got any funding. How do I go about that? And unfortunately, at that point in the process, it's just too late. So if you need funding, make sure that this is something that you're considering right up at the front of your consideration process. We also get lots of questions about how the US process interacts with the UK process. So the good news here is that applying to US universities do not take away from any UCAS spots that you might have. So you can absolutely complete a UCAS application at the same time as applying to US universities. And for the first part of the process, then you can run these two options simultaneously and perhaps create yourself a UK backup plan as well, or to balance the two against each other. Later on in the process, the point where you commit to a US university is earlier than a UK university, but at the beginning process, at least in the kind of application stage, you can do both simultaneously. Next. Okay, so the first step in your choosing process should be thinking about what are the most important factors to you. We talk a lot at Fulbright about this idea of finding your fit. And what fit refers to is finding a university that is a good fit, a good match for what you want out of your education, and what you want out of your university experience, and also what you can offer the university, especially if it's a selective school. Thinking about that sense of fit, that you're a good fit for the institution and the institution is a good fit for you. So there's lots of factors that you could be considering, some of which are inside the classroom about your academic experience, and some are about outside the classroom. So you could be thinking about things like the location of the university. You could be thinking about the way the academics are structured. You could be thinking about the vibe on campus, the kinds of students who go to the university. You could be thinking about its location in terms of, is it in an urban center or maybe it's in a college town? You could be thinking about whether it is an institution that is very competitive, where students really compete against each other for the top grades. Or is it more of a place where students are very collaborative and do a lot of group work? One or other of those, or somewhere in between, might be the best fit for you. You might want to be thinking about the availability of funding. Does this university have scholarships or other financial aid that might make it a good fit for you? Does it offer the major that you're interested in? If you know a particular area that you're interested in, maybe it's engineering, then you want to make sure that a university actually has majors in engineering available. So there's all sorts of things that you can be thinking about in terms of factors, and each person's sense of fit is going to be different to the next person. So what you want to be thinking about is how you might prioritize those factors as well. So for example, if you know that you don't like cold and snow, then basically lots of universities in northern United States, and particularly on the East Coast, may not be the best fit for you. Maybe you might be then looking at southern universities where there's much more warm climate all year round. Maybe you might be thinking about funding, and you might be thinking about the cost of living. If you are having to think about that kind of funding piece, then living in the middle of an urban center, like the middle of Manhattan, is going to be a lot more expensive than living in a lower cost of living place, perhaps like the state of Michigan. So you can find that something like costs even can vary hugely place to place. Maybe there's a particular sport you play that you want to play. Perhaps it's something like ultimate frisbee, in which case you'd start to use that to help hone what universities and colleges are available to you. I'd really encourage you at this point to also be thinking perhaps a lot beyond rankings. As UK people, I think it's really easy for us to understand how UK universities are organised and to have a sense of the number of universities. We've only got 120 of them to get our heads around. And so it's a very natural thing that we often lapse into relying on rankings to try and help us figure out a university system like the US, where there's 4,500 universities available. But I would just flag that rankings in the United States are different to how we organize rankings here. There is not the same approach to the methodology of rankings and the same sense of quality of those rankings. A lot of the US rankings don't necessarily take into account the same things that we might take into account in rankings in the UK. So some of the rankings in the US even just give weight to how much money a university has, or even invite universities to rank each other or rank themselves within a pecking order. So I think it's just being really aware of the limitations of rankings, particularly in a system where you don't have to choose a particular course. It's much easier in the UK to be able to take all the maths courses and try and measure them against each other. But in the US, remembering that students don't have to choose a particular subject of study from the get-go, it's much more difficult to try and measure a course of study when those courses, as we organize them in the UK, don't really exist. So my suggestion to you is to treat rankings with caution and instead make sure that you're reading widely and researching widely in order to choose a best fit university for you. Okay, so within the choosing process, you want to make sure that you're applying to universities that you've researched. Now, you could genuinely see yourself attending for 4 years if you were offered a place. Next up, you want to be thinking about those factors and how they then might apply to individual universities. So if you know that one of your red lines on your list is it must have a football team, and by that I mean the UK sense of football, if you know it's got to have a soccer team, then you're going to be looking at universities with soccer teams. Or if you know that it's got to be a university that has dorms where you can live for all 4 years, then that might be something that you're prioritizing in your search. So what you want to do is think about those factors that you've identified that being important to you or not important to you, and then use those to measure universities against them. So unlike UCAS, you're not limited to 5 universities. So in theory, you could apply to as many universities as you like. However, I'm going to suggest to you that submitting 50 applications to 50 different universities is going to be not only a lot of time and energy that you'll put into it, but they're likely to not be 50 great applications. And maybe you'd be lucky to get admitted to any of those universities. So it's much better to spend your time and energy and money on a smaller list of universities that you've actually, and smaller list of applications where you've actually done that research and spent that time thinking about your sense of fit at a university. So my suggestion is you possibly want to take those 4,500 universities to make a long list of maybe 10 to 20 schools that seem a good fit to you. If it were me in this process, as I start my research, I would probably have a spreadsheet going and I'd start to keep a track of the names of the universities that I'm looking at, perhaps their website, and I'd start to keep track of things that were interesting to me, perhaps particular deadlines or scholarships or particular factors about that university that stood out that help me keep me organized when I'm researching lots of different universities. We've got lots of great resources on the choosing section of our undergraduate guide on our website, including lots of links to specialist search engines that can really help with this process, narrowing down your choices of universities. So we're going to go through an example of one of those now, just so you can see what this process looks like. Next. Okay, so this is one of the search engines that we've linked to on our website. This is called the Big Future College Search, and it's a really great tool to be able to identify universities that might be worthy of further research for you. So there's a variety of different filters that you can use on this website. So you can use the type of university that you're looking at, the type of college. You could look at filtering it by the size of the university. You could look at location factors or the particular state it's in, perhaps the majors that are on offer. There are all sorts of filters that you can use to help slimline 4,500 universities into a much smaller group. So the other thing I'd just say is this is a third-party website and it is not like UCAS. So what you want to do is make sure that you're always going to double check any details that you found on this website with the actual university's website of itself. So you always want to make sure that you're looking and researching more deeply than just using this website, but it is a great place to get you started. Okay, so let's get started in how you might go ahead using this website. Okay, so you can see here at the bottom of the screen that there's 4,441 universities available. We're going to slim that down. So what I'm doing here is putting in some factors. I've chosen a 4-year school and I want a bachelor's degree. I've then gone and had a look at some other aspects like location, for example. I'm picking Ohio because I'm interested in seeing what universities are available. I also want to know about affordability. Does it offer financial aid? And is that financial aid open to international students? Absolutely. And what has happened now in choosing those different filters, I've gone from 4,441 universities that was listed on this website to just a couple, as you can see here. And I've got a bit of a sense that there are, out of all of those options, 2 that have come down to be the right fit for me. I've also chosen that these are going to be smaller schools, right? So I've taken out all the really big schools. I want to go to a smaller school where I'm going to feel like I know my professors, I'm going to know people on campus and be part of a really balanced community. Okay, so we've now got 2 universities that we're looking at. That's much more manageable than 4,400 and something. So you can play around the filters to find universities that might be a good fit for you. Next. Okay, so once you've found those, you can click into the profiles to learn more about each university. So I'm going to go and pick the Denison profile here. And have a little look about the review of the university. So you can see here that I'm in the Denison profile. It's got a bit of information about the university. I can learn more about it. I can see the types of applications they accept, whether it's there's a cost to apply to it, the contact details for the school, and important dates for the applications. And there's further fields, right, that I can see here. I'm looking at information about admissions, including deadlines and the selectivity of the school. I'm looking at the academics, including the profile of average admitted students and what kind of majors are available. There's also a section where I can look at the costs. So I can start to understand how much is this university per year? What kind of cost goes into that? And then I can also find out a bit more about campus life. So I want to know a little bit more about whether there's sports clubs or what kind of students go to this university. All of these details are available on this website, and it gives you a bit of an overview to the university. Amazing stuff. Right, let's imagine that I've been exploring Denison, and I would actually like to go and have a look more at their website. If you were looking at a website this is pretty standard for US universities. You can see that this is their website, and they have a section called admission and aid. This is pretty common terminology, and this gives you information about applying to this university. So Denison is a really selective university in the United States, and it's great because it's actually got a page all about applying for international students. And what you can see here is a focus on international students, which shows that they're interested and having international students here. And they've also got some information about how to go about applying. So you can see, for example, that it's test optional. It's not required to take or submit SATs or ACTs. It's also free to apply to. That's very cool. And you can see more information about their selection process. And more information about applying as an international student. There's also a really helpful FAQ here, which is asking questions and giving us information about Denison's policy around what's called financial aid and scholarships. So we can use that as well in our search process. So that's how you go about navigating a university website, and particularly around the admissions and financial aid. The thing about Denison, it's a really cool school on just outside of Columbus, Ohio. So you've got the kind of big city aspect, but then it's in a smaller college town on the outskirts of the city. So it's great if you're interested in kind of perhaps a pre-professional degrees. There's a big banking center in Columbus, and a really good opportunity to kind of take all sorts of interesting majors on what is a really beautiful campus. Okay, so we've had a look here at an example of how to go about using a tool like Big Future College Search to narrow down choices, and then to start looking on a university website to learn more about that particular university. Okay, next, please. What you then want to be doing when you start to look at university websites is to really think about your university research. So you want to make sure that you're really clear about each university. You want to spend time on the university website and possibly even reach out to the university directly. Maybe they have an information session or an online campus tour. Maybe there's an opportunity to even speak with a current student. Your goal here is to select about 6 to 10 institutions where you're actually going to submit an application. And so maybe you've got a long list of around 20. You want to make sure that you're really focusing your research and going deeper. So you might want to just think about spreading out your applications. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Rowena, I'm going to apply to some of the most selective universities in the United States. In fact, I'm going to submit 6 really selective applications. Perhaps you're going to apply to MIT and to Stanford and to Caltech. The reality is that these universities turn down many more people than they actually admit. And many of these universities are some of the most selective institutions on the planet. And just having great grades doesn't get you in. So you want to make sure that you're spreading out your applications, that you're maybe thinking, yes, I've got a couple of schools that I've got in mind, but I'm also thinking more strategically because I want to help maximize my chance of admission. So I'm thinking about perhaps other universities that other British students aren't applying to, for example. I also might want to be varying the level of selectivity in order to help maximize my chance, a little bit like you might with UK universities, and varying the kind of grade offer that you might get from a UK university. Okay, so the best place to find up-to-date and information is always going to be the university's website. So on a university website, you can look at the profile of the average admitted applicant, which will give you a sense of the kind of person that is actually getting in, not the person who's just applying. You can find out more information about majors, about the different programs, campus virtual tours, student life, sports, student housing, financial aid, etc. And you can also check out the resources they have for international students. And the kind of support that you might have as an international student. You can also look at university's social media presence, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or any other type of form. Many universities will have social media where you can use it to learn more about what makes that university tick, what are they talking about, what are they posting about, what are they engaging in, and to see their wider community. The other thing I'd just say is universities do want to hear from you. So whether you meet a representative at a fair like USA College Day, we'll talk about that later, or whether you reach out via email, universities want to hear from the person planning to apply. And just if you're a parent listening to this, just encourage your young person to do the reaching out. I often have admissions officers say to me, but Rowena, I'm not looking to admit the parent. So make sure that you're helping your young person by putting them in the driving seat of this process. Okay, next. I just want to flag a couple of universities that are super selective, really interesting schools that you might not have heard of before. So this is Middlebury College. Let me introduce you to it. It's a small liberal arts college in Vermont in the northeast of the United States. Vermont has some amazingly lovely hot, warm summers, but it also has some really cold winters. And this university even has its own ski mountain. Middlebury is really well known for its focus on languages, climate change, and climate science generally, with top professors in this subject. It's a small university with a real focus on undergraduate students. There aren't any graduate students here, so the students who attend Middlebury get to work with these world-leading professors in their research and in their subjects. And the small size means there's lots of access to opportunities and chances to form close working relationships with professors as well. So this is an example of a top university that you might not yet have heard of, but is actually really difficult to get into in terms of selectivity. Next. We're heading over to a different part of the United States at this point. So you might not have heard of Scripps College. So Scripps College is located in Claremont, California, which is a bit out of LA. It's another liberal arts college, and it also has top professors. It's a college for women or female identifying people only, and is a really great space for women to find their voice. It has some great programs, for example, in the area of museum studies, conservation, all sorts of interesting things around books and book binding and all sorts of interesting things going on. What's great about Scripps is it's part of a consortium. So there's 5 different universities that make up this consortium, and they kind of share a campus. So Scripps has its part of a campus. And it means that students can take classes in the other colleges that make up this consortium. They can eat in the other dining halls, use the libraries, things like that. And they share a lot of sports clubs and societies and things going on. So lots of opportunities going on. And each campus, each university has its own identity. So students who go to Scripps will know themselves as Scripps college students, but they have this opportunity to go and explore other colleges around the side. It's another great college to consider. Next. Okay, and then I thought I'd just tell you about Vanderbilt University. So Vanderbilt is a much bigger university in the middle of Nashville, Tennessee, which you may know as the home of country music. Vanderbilt has a really vibrant campus with a big culture and arts scene, which is not a surprise given it's in Nashville. It's a very green campus, but it's right in the middle of downtown. So it's really a university of the city. Vanderbilt has loads of research hospitals. It's got big engineering programs. It's got a much bigger university feel. And what you'll find is that there are undergraduate students, graduate students, and top professors. So it's a much bigger university community. I just wanted to highlight these three very different universities. They're all great in their own unique way. And all three are selective universities. So every year I work with students who are perhaps thinking, oh, I think I might want to apply to Harvard. And these are the kinds of schools that they might come across in their research that are peer schools to a school like Harvard. Okay, next. While we're talking about it, let me just give you a quick note on the Ivy League. I sometimes despair hugely when I hear the UK press talking about the Ivy League like it is something equivalent to the Russell Group. The thing to know about the Ivy League is it is historically just a sports league between 8 of the oldest universities in New England. They were all within driving distance of each other, and they could therefore play football, American football, against each other in a mini little league, which they named the Ivy League. It is not the equivalent of the Russell Group. There is no way to become part of the Ivy League or leave the Ivy League. It is literally these 8 institutions. They play sports against each other. That is all it means. There are lots of universities in the US that lots of people will tell me must be part of the Ivy League. Remembering that MIT, not part of the Ivy League, Stanford, not part of the Ivy League, Northwestern, not part of the Ivy League. Lots of schools, UCLA, not part of the Ivy League. All of these schools regularly get mentioned to me and kind of joined up in this idea of the Ivy League. And it's just really important to remember that it is just a sports league. The universities that are part of the Ivy League are private research institutions in one particular corner of the United States. So it's just really important to remember that if you were say, okay, I'm going to just focus on the Ivy League, you're actually really limiting your opportunities to explore lots of different other institutions. The other thing you want to think about is that the schools that are part of the Ivy League, but are also not limited to the Ivy League, there is a group of schools that I would call ultra competitive. These are schools where they receive many, 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 many thousands of applications every single year, and they admit a really small percentage. So just so you have a sense of this, a school like, let's say, Harvard admits around 1 to 2% of the students who actually apply to it. And you can bet your bottom dollar that those students are all amazingly academically qualified, brilliant human beings. They're applying there. For reference, Oxford has around an 18% admissions rate and Cambridge a 21% admissions rate. So an admissions rate of 1 to 2% is really small in comparison. The other thing I just mentioned is if you were saying to me, but Rowena, I want to make sure I go to a top US university. Well, we could say, okay, well, what about the top 1% of universities in the UK? Top 1% of UK universities would be 1.2 universities. You can't have both Oxford and Cambridge in that top 1%. But if you're actually talking about a university system where there are 4,500 universities, a top 1%, you're talking around 40 to 50 institutions. I'm pretty sure most people in the UK can't name me 50 US universities, let alone which ones actually fall into that top 1% bracket. So there's a whole world out there to explore is my point, and don't limit yourself by just getting hung up on this idea of the Ivy League. Just because you haven't heard of university doesn't mean it might not be a great fit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we get lots of questions about funding. And so in this section, we're going to think about the costs of going to a US university and also how you can think about gaining funding to help make your US studies happen and the different strategies that you can go about to find this funding. Next. Okay, so be aware there are a few costs that you should be expecting when thinking about US universities. So first of all, you want to be thinking about costs even before you start at university. So these are application expenses. So you could be thinking about the cost to sit an admissions exam, the SAT or ACT. We'll talk about them more later. You could be thinking about whether there's an application fee to actually even submit your application to a US university. They'll add up. You could be thinking about any fees to submit financial aid forms. Those could add up too. And then also you want to be mindful that if you were admitted to a US university, you'd need to apply for a student visa. And there's a set of costs attached to that as well. So that's even before you start your studies, there can be costs upfront. The other thing I'd just note here is then to also think about tuition and fees. So in the UK, we tend to think about UK universities and tuition being £9,250 or thereabouts. But what you want to be thinking about in the US is that they measure this slightly differently. They call it the cost of attendance. And the cost of attendance includes not only tuition and the fees, but it also includes the living costs. And these can vary hugely university to university, this whole cost of attendance. So it's something to be mindful of as you go through this process. And the cost of attendance is per year. So if you're doing a 4-year degree, then it's going to be 4 years the cost of attendance. What you'll find is universities will break down the cost of attendance on their website. We'll see an example of that in a moment. You also want to think about any other costs of living. So what you will find is that different parts of the United States have different living costs, just like in the UK, if you study in, say, Lancaster, it's going to be cheaper than if you study in London. So too, you'll find that across the US as well. So this can be really differ, and it can also be affected by the choices you make. So to live in a dorm on campus might be more expensive than finding off-campus housing. So it's just something to be mindful of as you balance out these costs. Next. There is some really good news in this picture though, and that comes back to what Abby was saying at the beginning of this presentation, which was about one of the reasons that UK students will be looking to the US, because there's some really good funding available. If you're willing to be open-minded, strategic, and flexible, there is lots of UK students who are finding some really amazing funding in order to support their studies and make them affordable. The key is to put the time and effort into seeking out and applying for those funds and to applying to universities that have that funding available. Next. Okay, so what kinds of money are we talking about here? So here are some of the sources of money that you can think about when applying to US universities. The first thing to just note is that the way Americans think about funding higher education is a little bit different to how we think here in the UK. About university costs. So in the US, there is an expectation that a family will do whatever it can to help their young person get educated. So you'll often have heard of perhaps parents starting a college fund for a very young child, and that's because they're saving towards the cost of university. So the first thing to think about is what personal or family funds are available. US universities do expect families to prioritize a student's education and to put aside whatever they can to help make university affordable. While we think about funding differently here in the UK, it's really helpful to just be mindful that universities will ask for a family contribution, and that may well depend on what resources are available to the family. Okay, next form of funding is to think about the US universities themselves. And in terms of seeking additional funding, this is an area I see UK students being most successful at gaining funding is from the universities themselves, often of whom have pots of money to attract the very best students to come and study at their campus. We're going to talk about these a little bit more in a moment, and about how this money exactly works. The other things you can think about are what we would call external funding bodies. So these might be foundations, charities, businesses that also have pots of money available. Did you know Fulbright is actually an external funding body? We give out scholarships to people studying in the US at graduate, postgraduate level. But there can be different pots of money available that you might also be able to apply to help offset those costs. Then finally, you also just want to note around loans. So unfortunately, you can't take the UK student loan with you to go and fund your studies in the US. It just doesn't go. And the thing I would just say is to think about US student loans. Many US student loans you would not be eligible for unless you're a US citizen or permanent resident. So if you're looking at loans to fund your study, I'd just say be cautious and be careful. Commercial loans can be really expensive and have really unstudent friendly terms around their interest and so on. So if you're looking at loans to fund your studies, I'd just say pause, stop. Is there a university with more funding available that might meet your sense of fit better than taking out commercial loans or unfriendly loans along the way? So do have a look at our website for more information about loans. And if anyone's a dual citizen and wants to ask questions about that, we can answer how you can access American student loans if you're a US citizen. Okay, so keep in mind you might be having to pull some family funding, some US university funding, and maybe some funding from external funding bodies. You can pull from all three areas in order to make it possible, to make it affordable. Next. Okay, so we talked about university funding. Like I said, an area that is really beneficial for UK students. There are two types of university funding that we tend to see, and they're called need-based aid and merit-based scholarships. So financial aid is a term that is a kind of an umbrella term that means the money that you receive in order to help pay for education. So many universities offer what's called need-based financial aid, which is a bit like means testing the cost of the university against what money might be available to a student. Or they might be looking at merit-based scholarships, which is where a university is allocating money on the basis of non-financial criteria. It might be because you are talented at particular things, whether that's music or sport or drama or whatever else, your leadership, your academics, whatever. Okay, so need-based aid, like I said, is based on this idea of financial needs. So when a student applies to a university that offers this kind of money, they need to check a box to say, yes, I would like to be considered for need-based aid. And alongside their university application, they will submit a load of forms which give a complete financial picture of that student and their family. What's coming in, what's going out, what resources does the family have available to them? The university, if they want to admit the student and they offer this form of money, would look at the cost to attend, and then they would look at the resources available to that student and their family. And if there is a gap between what the student and their family can afford to pay and the cost of attendance, the university wants to admit the student and they offer this form of money, then they would make up the remainder in gift money, free money that doesn't need to be paid back. It's going to be important to note that this varies university to university. Some universities don't offer need-based aid at all. Some universities only offer need-based aid and they don't offer merit-based scholarships. So just being aware that that's how the kind of process works. It's really important that you do your research as you're looking at this. And then you'll also see that there are something called merit-based scholarships. So merit-based scholarships often have a process outlined, how you can go about applying for them. They're often either, they might be for top applicants in the admissions pool, full stop. They might have specific criteria to them, top international students applying, or they might have a particular criteria around leadership or volunteering or art or music or something like that. Merit-based scholarships don't consider what resources a family have. It is just a gift money of some amount to be aware of. Merit-based scholarships could be for $10,000, a year. That might be amazing, but if the cost to attend is $70,000 a year, you're still looking at $60,000. Whereas you might find that there's a merit-based scholarship that covers all of the tuition costs. Amazing, in which case then you're only as a family looking at the living costs of the student at the university to cover those. Other thing to just note is sports scholarships. We get a lot of questions about these. Sports scholarships are a particular subset of merit-based scholarships, and they are for top athletes in particular areas, normally playing, I would say, at county level or above in specific sports. And there may be scholarships related to being able to study at that university based on the student being part of the team in that particular sport. So being aware that there's a whole process related to that. If anyone's got questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We're happy to pick up those about sports, or you can have a look on our website. So just to make sure that you're looking at each university website, perhaps again, if it were me, I'd have a spreadsheet going. I might be keeping track of what kind of funding is available, and I'd be keeping track of any deadlines for certain scholarships or anything like that. You want to be proactive. Sometimes this information is not clear on a US university website, so feel free to ask. It doesn't harm, it doesn't hurt you. Do feel free to be proactive. And often the process for applying is really either really clearly set out on the university website, or you might find that you're considered automatically for these types of funding. Next. Okay, so I wanted to give you an example. This is Rice University in Houston, Texas. Rice is a top US university. It's often known as the Harvard of the South. And it has particular strengths around space science, but a full range of subjects as well. It is got a strong Texan spirit to it as well, and just a really cool school in lots of different ways. So you can see on the Rice website, they have a breakdown of the cost of attendance. And this gives you a breakdown of not just tuition and the cost of housing in the university, but it also gives you a breakdown of, for example, other costs that you might be looking at. So it's got some estimated campus living expenses. It's got an estimation of books and supplies. It's got an estimation of personal expenses. Personal expenses being anything that is like things like clothing, toiletries, dinner out, anything like that. They have an estimation for what an average Rice student might spend. So it can be a really good way of having a look through and understanding what goes into that cost to attend. Now, the thing about this is you can see on this website that the cost to attend this university is in the region of $86,000 a year. So that's a huge amount of money by anyone's circumstance. Next. Okay, so we're exploring around on the Rice University website, and we can see that they have a section called merit-based scholarships. And they say merit-based scholarships, scholarship recipients genuinely distinguish themselves scholastically and personally, even within a highly selective pool of admitted students. And then you can see they go on to give some examples of the kinds of people who have been winning these merit-based scholarships. So what I'm taking from this statement here is Rice is really selective. I can see that in all sorts of ways, what I know about Rice, but also I could check the class profile. I'd know that they are a really difficult school to get into. And what they're indicating is that the merit-based scholarships go to the very best applicants, even within their admissions pool. And what you can also see here is that the scholarship is integrated into the admissions process. So there's no separate forms or interviews needed. They will go through as they're reading applications to select the very best students. So you may automatically qualify for one of these scholarships. Next. The other great news is they have pages about financial aid for international students, which is really helpful. You'll see that international students here, they say at Rice, we believe that cost should not be a barrier to attending the finest universities in the country. We admit students from all socioeconomic backgrounds and fund many students who might not otherwise be able to afford a Rice education. International students who receive need-based aid will have 100% of their demonstrated need met with an institutional grant aid. What does that mean? It means that somebody who is applying to RICE who is seeking need-based financial aid, if they needed 100% of all the cost of attendance, all the tuition and the living costs covered because they had nothing, then RICE, if they wanted to admit them, would be able to cover that whole 100%. Now, most families, I imagine, will be somewhere on a spectrum between 100 and 0. Each family is different, but RICE is willing to make sure that RICE becomes affordable to any student who would contribute to their community and be a great fit for the university. So, is why it's really important to check each university's webpage to see what funding is available for international students. We always want to make sure that everybody's got funding in place and that you're thinking about this from the get-go. So if funding is a consideration, it's definitely something that you want to make sure is available along the way when you're looking at university websites. Next. Okay, so we talked a bit about external funding bodies. And as I mentioned, these could be businesses, organizations, charities, etc. The thing to think about external funding bodies is they tend to have a very specific lens that they're offering their scholarships through. So they may have very specific criteria based on the mission of the organization that's funding the scholarship. So it could be that they're looking for students from a particular country of origin or ethnicity or religious faith, perhaps a particular interest in a certain field, of a certain gender, particular interests or talents. So you might find there's an external funding body that offers scholarships for women engineers. Amazing if that's you. Maybe it's as specific as women engineers at a particular US university. These are not uncommon. So you want to have a little look around to see if there is any external funding bodies. So you might find that the university that you're looking at is linking you off to external funding bodies that fund their students. So that might be a way to look at it. Or you could go ahead and look on our website where there are all sorts of lists that you can use to explore different scholarships that are offered by external funding bodies. So I'll just give you an example of one of the most generous scholarships offered by an external funding body available to UK students looking to study in the US. There is a foundation called the Moorhead Cain Foundation who offer a scholarship, one of the oldest scholarships in the United States, to students who are looking to attend UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is one of the best public universities in the United States. And they offer a scholarship that looks at a candidate's leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. And they look across these 4 attributes that they've identified are important to them. And they will then look to fund a community of scholars to go to UNC Chapel Hill. The great thing about this scholarship is it is open to UK students. We generally see somewhere between 2 and maybe 6 UK students winning this scholarship each year. And this scholarship covers not only all tuition and all living costs for UNC Chapel Hill, but it also gives the winners access to money that covers things like personal expenses, laptops, things like that. But it also covers to be part of this amazing scholar community, even within this wider university community. And then it covers all sorts of what they call summer experiences. So whether it is teaching in a different country, taking up an internship in Singapore, whether it is traveling across Africa, whether it is doing a research project in fossils in Russia, whatever it happens to be, the Moorhead Cain Foundation, as part of their scholarship, fund students at the university to go and do these cool things with their summers. There are thousands of funding bodies out there. Not all of them are as generous as the Moorhead Cain Scholarship. So you may find that you're applying for several scholarships to perhaps cover the cost of your flights to university. Maybe there's a $500 scholarship here and a $5,000 scholarship there. Maybe you win them both, and then you've got the beginning of a pot of money. So you might start to stack those scholarships up. What you want to do is stay open and flexible. Lots of these scholarships don't receive as many applications as they probably should have. So you want to be kind of open-minded and willing to flex around and spend the time on completing applications for these if this is something that is useful to you in your process. Okay, so where are we going from here? The other things to just have a think about are to think about how you might go about creating a strategy for funding university. So there's a couple of things that you can think about balancing off against each other. As I said earlier, cost of living. You can manage the cost of US study by varying where you might live, and that cost of living can vary dramatically across the United States. So that might be one thing that you're thinking about in your funding strategy. Another thing to have a think about is the cost of tuition. Different universities can charge whatever they like. So you might find that you can find universities with a lower cost of tuition, which means a lower overall cost of attendance. You might find that state universities tend to have lower tuition costs than a private university. So this could be a way to manage the cost of studying. And then you also want to think about funding opportunities. Does the university have funding opportunities? If so, how big are those? And between these 3 points, you can kind of triangulate a funding strategy for yourself. What you may find is that you might be looking at lower tuition cost universities, but you may find that they have less funding available, or perhaps you're not such a good fit for the funding. With a private university, you might find that it's higher tuition, but then you might be looking at whether you will qualify for either need-based financial aid or some form of merit-based scholarship. So you're going to be wanting to balance these 3 factors along the way. Next. Something else I just want to mention is community colleges. This is a system that's really unique to the US. We don't have it here in the UK. Community colleges are a 2-year university, a 2-year college, where somebody graduates with what's called an associate's degree. So this is a qualification that is not a degree that we have here in the UK. And this can be a really great alternative pathway that can actually save you a huge amount of money. So an associate's degree often has a professional or vocational focus, but it also has community colleges have opportunities to have programs to allow students to do what's called the 2+2 model. So when a student starts their studies at a community college, they're going to take a range of general classes, just like you would at a 4-year institution, and build up their credits in a really supportive environment. What they'll do is finish and get their associate's degree, but they've also built up credit towards a 4-year degree. So then they can transfer to a 4-year university to do their final 2 years and perhaps specialize their degree in a particular major. So this idea of transferring from a 2-year college to a 4-year university, and then you can graduate with a degree, a bachelor's degree from that 4-year university in just 2 years. So you can see here, I've got an example of Los Angeles Valley College in Los Angeles, California. And what they will do is have a relationship with the 4-year universities around them in order that you can transfer. So Los Angeles Valley College works with UCLA, USC, and Cal Poly. The thing to just mention here is community colleges tend to have a much more inclusive entry standard, where they are much more able to take students with a range of grades and make it an educational pathway that makes it possible to perhaps go to a 4-year school that you might not otherwise have got into. And also community colleges tend to be a lot cheaper to attend than a 4-year school. So you can kind of offset some of that cost of doing a 4-year degree and, to offset some of that cost. You can potentially save yourselves thousands of dollars along the way. Okay, so if you want to have more information about community colleges, do check out our website. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about some funding tips. So the things, the top tips and my top takeaways here is this is something we get endless questions about all day, every day. My top tips, big takeaways are start early. If you need funding to make a US university happen, then please do make sure that you're putting that at the very beginning of the process. Make sure you're starting your research early. Make sure that you're lining yourself up to be in the very best possible place. The next thing you want to be thinking about is being flexible with choosing your universities. So I just put here this picture of these goldfish. I'd like you to invite you to think of that first goldfish bowl full of goldfish as a university that lots of British students might be applying to, perhaps somewhere like Columbia University in New York. If you apply there as a British student, you are going to be one of many British students who are applying, and it might be quite difficult to stand out, even if you're brilliant, by applying there, because you are just one of many British or other international students who might be looking to study there. On the right, however, is a goldfish bowl with just one goldfish in. And that I invite you to think about is a university somewhere like, say, Washington University in St. Louis, or known as WashU. WashU is one of the top US universities. Totally the same kinds of students who might go to somewhere like Columbia or Harvard will be going to WashU. But WashU isn't really well known here in the UK. So there's a real opportunity to be flexible and to be strategic with applications and to actually put yourself in a really good spot by perhaps getting off the beaten path and making sure that you're doing your research to find universities that are a really good fit for you. And then you also want to be thinking about what makes you a standout applicant at the university. If it's just that you've got great grades, I mean, great, but maybe that doesn't actually make you stand out that much. So it's about thinking about, again, back to your sense of fit, and also what you might be able to offer to the university community as well. So you want to be strategic with your approach, and you want to make sure that you're looking around and being flexible with the universities that you're perhaps looking at. Perfect. Alrighty, I've talked a lot. I'm going to hand back over to my colleague Abby to take us through the next section.
All right, thanks, Rowena. So now that we've learned all about how you can choose which universities to apply to, we're going to talk about the application itself. So now on completing an application to a US university. So what are these universities looking for when they read these thousands of applications? What kind of students are they looking for? What kind of applicant are they looking for? So the first thing that they consider is academics. US universities look first for academic achievement measured by your results, so your GCSEs and your A-levels, and admission test scores. So you can check uni websites for average applicant profiles and compare your results with the average student scores to see where you might stand, and that can give you a good idea within your choosing process of which unis you might want to apply to. However, at American universities, academic achievement alone will not guarantee entrance to a competitive US uni, and it is a much more holistic process than in the UK. So in addition to just academics and academic success, universities will also consider academic fit. So what the reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution and how it helps towards your goals. So for example, you want to be in New York, but why are you applying to NYU over Columbia? Is there a particular program that one offers that the other doesn't? Or is there a campus activity that really draws you to that particular university versus another one? Or maybe it's one university's mission and values that really speak to you as opposed to another university's missions and values. And another thing that's quite important and considered very intensely by US university admissions is there is a big focus on extracurriculars. So you don't have to do everything under the sun outside of school to be considered competitive for admittance to a US university. But what they want is to see that you've highlighted what you are involved in, the things that you are involved in. So personal attributes are also taken into consideration when it comes to getting accepted to a US university. So within this holistic admissions process, they look at the whole person and not just your academics. So what makes you you outside of just going to school and being a student? So they're looking to diversify their campuses and their classrooms, and that's why they want to know who you are. So that is included in that is interest in your academic field of choice, but also your overall interest, your character, your leadership abilities, for example. So the components of a US application, so unlike the UK, you apply to each uni individually rather than a centralized body like UCAS, and students can apply to as many as they'd like, as many as possible. But again, for time and cost purposes, we recommend applying to 6 to 10 schools. So in the US, there is something called the Common Application, and around 900 universities use the Common Application, which is just a system to help streamline the demographic aspects of the application. So it is not UCAS in that you will still have to tailor all of your applications to each university individually. And most universities also ask different questions, and they might also have their own supplementary questions that are different from each other. There's also no standard process for applications, deadlines, requirements, etc. Those will all vary by university. So each university will set its own deadlines and requirements, and most applications will follow a similar format. So you might be able to reuse or adapt the materials you prepare for each, but in most cases, it will not work to just prepare one essay, for example, one supplemental essay, and be able to use it for all of the universities you're applying for. But most university applications will will include an application form with basic demographics. And again, as a reminder, the Common Application is something that can streamline this particular aspect of the application process. So if all the universities you're applying to use the Common App, you will only have to fill out this basic demographic information once. Then most applications will also consider admissions test scores, transcripts, essays, and then 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And then finally, an application fee of approximately, and again, it differs, between $50 to $100 per application. So application deadlines, again, also differ. So there's a few types of deadlines that we'll talk about. So one is the regular decision deadline. So students for this deadline typically apply by the 1st of January, and then you hear back with the university's decision by the 1st of April. And this type of deadline is non-binding and non-restrictive, and that means you can apply to as many universities as you like following this deadline. So the next deadline that we want to talk about is early action. So this is students will typically apply by the 1st of November and hear back about the decision by the 15th of December, typically. And this type of deadline is non-binding and non-restrictive. So you can also apply to as many universities at this deadline as you would like. And then there's also early decision. So there are 2 early decision deadlines. There's early decision 1 in November and a slightly less common early decision 2 in January. And the main thing you need to keep in mind with these deadlines is that they are binding. It means if you apply to this university and you are accepted, you are committing to attending that university. So that means it should be your first choice worldwide of university you want to go to. And if you're accepted, you will withdraw all other applications worldwide as well and attend that one university. The only exception to that is if the financial aid they offer you is not sufficient. But there are a lot of benefits to applying early. One, you'll hear back earlier about your decision, about your acceptance, your admittance decisions. There's a smaller applicant pool. It expresses a strong interest in that university, and universities, when they're looking at who they want to admit, they will consider that as a positive that you have applied early because you're saying, I really want to attend your university. And it can make you more competitive for funding that the university might provide. So something to think about when you're considering admissions deadlines is timing. If you applied early, you should receive your decisions by the end of December, and the regular decisions should be received by the 1st of April. And when it comes to the decisions that you might receive from universities, there's 3 types. There's accepted, waitlist, and not accepted. So on this note, I want to address unconditional offers. So please note that while U.S. universities do not offer conditional admission, meaning receiving certain scores on your final year exams in order to be admitted, keep in mind you will be rewarded for doing well on your final year exams. And many academic departments will award advanced standings for students with A levels, often awarding more university credit the better you do. So bear in mind that in extreme cases, the university may also reconsider your admissions on the other side of that coin if your end of year exams don't go well. So admissions tests, we've mentioned these a few times now. So the ones that are the most common and the ones that you maybe have heard us mention now are the ACT and the SAT. So what role do they play? So there is no national curriculum at secondary school level in the US. So while that does exist in the UK, the US has a way to evaluate applicants from diverse areas and diverse schools, and that is these admissions tests. So one thing we do want to note is that you should definitely check if the universities you're applying to require these admissions tests. There's been a trend after COVID of requiring these tests less and less, so being test optional, it's called. But recently we have seen a bit of a resurgence in these tests being required again, so definitely just double check. So in the summer after year 12, or in the autumn of year 13 before the half-term holiday, or about 10 to 12 months before enrollment, you will want to sit an admissions exam. Universities typically require either the ACT or the SAT. However, it does depend on what the university wants. They'll usually be able to accept both. And once again, sometimes these tests are optional for university admittance, and sometimes they aren't, and make sure you're double checking whether or not they're optional for international students as well, because sometimes that can be a bit different. So which one do you choose, the ACT or the SAT? One is not considered better than the other. It's just what is the best fit for you. The best way to decide is to take a timed full-length practice test of each type. There are many that are free online. And since the content and the style of the SAT and ACT are a bit different, you might want to consider other factors like how you handle time pressure and what types of questions you find most challenging, and that can help you determine which test is a better fit for you to take. Transcripts. So a transcript, which is just a listing of your academic qualifications and marks covering years 10 to 13 in England and Wales, years 11 to 14 in Northern Ireland, and years S3 to 6 in Scotland. So a transcript is generated by your school, but you may need to provide your school or counselor with information about what to include in a transcript, as well as any additional school reports. So a transcript may include the years you attended the school, your GCSE scores, and your predicted A levels. So keep in mind that there is no direct conversion between UK and US marks. So the school needs to report your marks in the British system. The US university will use their own conversion method to translate your marks into the American system. So don't worry about that. We encourage you not to do that conversion yourself. And then the transcript is typically submitted online by the school. And then often a school report might be required. So some may also ask for the school report, which contains information about the school itself, just for context, so that the US university can better understand your secondary school. And we have templates available for both of these on our website. Recommendation letters. So it's best to think of these as a marketing tool for yourself as an applicant. So you'll be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation, and the letter should be through the referees who will have particular areas they can speak to and may direct referees to write about, for example, your ability to succeed at university, past academic performance, observations about your performance in class or on assignments, school awards, writing and critical thinking skills, subject knowledge, work experience, etc. Things like your ability to positively contribute to the university department and the university campus life and diversity, leadership abilities, and your involvement in the school and community. All these kinds of things are great things to include in a letter of recommendation, or to have someone who's writing that letter of recommendation include. And you should also ask someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom, so that they can speak best to who you are. So the university may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. For example, one letter should come from a counselor, but definitely at least one letter from a teacher. And it will generally be your responsibility to choose and liaise with referees and give them the necessary information to complete a recommendation letter. So consider meeting with your referee to discuss the letter. It's in your best interest to help your referees write the best letter they can. And maybe there are some things you do outside of school that your referee doesn't know about. And so you might wish to schedule a meeting to discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree, your interest in particular universities you selected, your future goals, your academic achievements, extracurricular activities, all these kind of things. It can't hurt to schedule a meeting with someone who's writing a letter of recommendation for you to discuss these things. So make sure your referee is aware of the deadline and the paperwork that they need to complete. And it is your responsibility to inform the referee of these deadlines and requirements, and encourage referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone and use very positive, descriptive language to discuss applicants, both in and out of the classroom. So that's what admission officers are used to reading and kind of expecting to see. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind what will be written about your American counterparts who are also applying when you're preparing your UK referees to write their letters. So definitely encourage your referees to refrain from using restrained or modest language. So essays. Essays are one of the most important parts of the application process for undergraduate study in the US. A strong essay can set you apart from other applicants and give you an opportunity to showcase yourself to a uni. But one of the most important things you should consider as a UK applicant is that your personal statement, your personal essay, your essays in general are not your UCAS personal statement. Strong essays can set you apart. So rather than submitting an explanation of your interests and achievements in a particular field of study as you would via UCAS, you'll be asked to respond to between 1 and 3 essay questions on the US university application. Each university will set its own questions, as well as desired length for your response. However, on the Common App system, there will be one essay question that goes to all universities and supplemental questions which are unique to each institution. So one of the 7 Common App prompts, for example, is reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? So you want to describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So those are some examples of Common App essay prompts. It's unlikely that you'll be able to compose one essay that will sufficiently answer questions posed by multiple universities. However, many students are able to reuse elements of essays for different universities. So when it comes to supplemental essays, universities want to get an idea of who you are through these as well as the main essay. But sometimes the questions can show something about the university's culture as well. So for example, we've got the University of Chicago. It's known for its comedy, and the campus can be a bit quirky along with its students. So to reflect this, their essay prompt that they asked a few years ago was also a bit quirky, and it was just find X. Another one that they've asked is what's so odd about odd numbers? So as you can see, these are very creative-based essay questions and very different from what you would write in a UCAS statement. Some other examples, so from Dartmouth College, which is in New Hampshire, they're also very deeply personal about the questions that they ask students to answer or applicants to answer. So for example, when you meet someone for the first time, what do you want them to know about you, but generally don't tell them? So this question definitely, as you can see, it's clear that it is not your UCAS personal statement. This is not where you need to go on and on about your interest in math, but because the US University wants to know who you are as a person. So if you're just writing tips when you're working on these essays, ensure that you address the question fully. Use clear, concise language, avoid vague or empty statements or cliches. It's important to remember that admissions officers read thousands and thousands of essays all the time. So anything that's cliche or tacky that they see and read all the time, try to avoid that. And if you reuse an essay, be careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university and program, and double check that all the references within the text are to the correct university. Make sure you proofread extensively and even ask others to proofread your essays and offer feedback. And most importantly, be yourself. Don't give the admissions officers the answers you think they want to hear, because again, they probably read that all the time. You want to give them the truth. They want to know who you are, and they can really see through fake and ingenuine answers. So think about what sets you apart, let your personality come through in the essay. And if you want some more tips on writing essays and some example essays, our website has some great links to example essays on university websites. So other opportunities in the US, I'm going to pass this back over to my colleague, Rowena.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Abby. Okay, so you might be sitting through that and thinking, gosh, that sounds really interesting, but that's an awful lot of information. And maybe this is not quite what I'm looking to do at this point in time. So we also just wanted to flag a few other ways to get to go and study in the US. Next. Okay, so if you decided that a US university degree for all 4 years wasn't something that was the right fit for you, and particularly thinking about quite an involved admissions process, there are a few other things that you can think about. Where you can still get the opportunity to study in the US, but without having to go through that whole process. So you could consider going to a US university through a UK university through what's called a university exchange. There are many programs in the UK that are 4 years long, and they are a 3-year UK university degree with an inbuilt university exchange year where you get to go and study in the US for a year, perhaps studying something related to your course that you're doing at your UK university. For example, the University of Manchester has partnerships with 18 universities in the United States. The University of East Anglia has relationships with more than 60 universities in the United States. This can be a lot simpler way to go and study in the US through a wide range of different courses. It doesn't just have to be something like American studies. Lots of degrees offer this opportunity, and it can be a very cost-effective and simple way to be able to go and study in the US because you can access a UK student loan for that study year. So this can be a really good option if you're interested in experiencing life on a US campus. Another thing you could think about is whether there are any summer institutes available to you. There are a few summer institutes that US universities themselves offer. This is where you can go out for perhaps a summer and study a particular class or a particular area, or take part in particular leadership programs. There's all sorts of opportunities out there, and they can be really great ways to boost your CV and build up your academic inquiry field beyond perhaps something that you're just doing in your course at the UK university. There is a specific one called the Study of the US Institutes, SUSI for short, which is a summer institute, particularly around student leadership, and it is a funded summer institute. So it's something to have a look at, and you can find links to that on our website. It's run by the State Department to get some of the best student leaders from around the world to US universities for a summer. Or you can also consider studying in the United States. This is a degree I actually did. It's American Studies, which is a particular degree in the UK that has a focus on things like literature, history, politics, film, constitutional studies of the United States. Kind of have a real lens in a really interdisciplinary way between lots of different subjects. And often American Studies degrees in the UK have an inbuilt year in the United States as well. You could also have a look at summer or internships or summer work. So you could have a look at an organization like BUNAC that offers internships, or you could have a look at something like Camp America, which helps people from the UK go and work in summer camps in the United States for the summer. So potentially a way to earn some money and also have an American experience. And then you could also have a think about postgraduate study, what the Americans would call graduate study. And postgraduate study is something that UK students can look to apply to after having done an undergraduate degree. There's a whole range of advice and information about applying for graduate study in the United States on our website in our Education USA section. And it's worth noting as well that Fulbright is an external funding body, has something called Fulbright Awards, which are scholarships available for UK citizens who are looking to study in the United States at the graduate level. So just bear in mind that there are all sorts of options out there. Right, next, how can we help you take any of these interests further? So here's how some of the ways that Education USA can help support you. So on our next slide, just a flag that we run something called the Sutton Trust Fulbright US program. The same advisors who are Education USA advisors, we are giving advice out on this program. It is for high achieving Year 12 students who come from lower income families across the UK. We go through a process of exploring what it might mean to study at a US university before offering students the chance to apply to US universities as well. This program also includes a free trip to the United States for the students selected for the program, where we go and visit US universities. And as I said, it is free for the students who are selected to take part. And you can find out more information on our website, or if you just Google Sutton Trust Fulbright US program, you'll come across the program website. At the moment, applications for this year are closed, but if you are in Year 11 or below, or you know someone who's in Year 11 or below, our applications for next year's cohort will open in around November and close in January. So you've got plenty of time to have a look at it. Next. I also just want to flag our Fulbright website. Please do go and have a look, and you will see that one of the main navigation items is Education USA advice. There's a huge amount of information here in an undergraduate section and in a graduate section, where we break down in huge amounts of detail how to go about exploring, choosing, funding, and applying for US universities at both undergraduate and graduate level. And we have loads of links out to all sorts of helpful resources, information, and so on. So please do check around that for that as well. Next. So we offer email advice, so you can drop us an email, you can find out information on our website to find out how to go about that. And periodically we offer one-to-one video appointments as well, where you can speak with an advisor if you've got specific questions you want answered. Next. We hold a full range of events, including this one, for example, about studying in the United States. Some of those are in person, lots of them are online. Sometimes they're general, like this one about the whole process of applying for an undergraduate degree. Sometimes they'll have a specific focus or specific area, like how to write a killer Common App essay, for example, or a particular type of program that you might be looking at. So making sure you have a look at that. And then we also attend university fairs across the UK as well. Next. I also just want to flag to you an amazing opportunity called USA College Day. USA College Day is going to be 48 this year. So for 48 years, US College Day has been running. It is held each September. So this next September will be when the next one is. And this is Europe's largest US college fair. Universities from across the US fly into the UK, into London, to meet with amazing British students and to meet them, to provide information to them. And, you know, often admissions officers will tell me afterwards that they met some really great students and then they remember them when they come to read their application when the student applies. So there's a huge amount of information available at this fair. Fair entry is free. You just have to register for a ticket in advance. Tickets are released at the end of August, but if you go onto our website, you can sign up for a notification of when we open tickets.